You're a ghost, Serafina. And ghosts don't own equity. They just haunt the machines. My father's voice was a cold blade, twisting in the air between us. Sterling stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vanguard penthouse, swirling a glass of bourbon that cost more than my first car. The Chicago skyline glittered behind him, a kingdom he believed he ruled alone. "I built the neural bridge, Dad," I said, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a decade of suppressed volcanic rage. "I wrote every single line of the Vanguard OS. Dominic can't even open a terminal window without a tutorial. You're giving my life's work to a man who thinks Python is just a type of snake?" Dominic, my younger brother by 2 years and a professional disappointment at 34, let out a jagged, arrogant laugh from the leather armchair. "Sis, you're so dramatic. You're the mechanic. You're the girl in the basement with the grease on her hands." "I'm the face. I'm the one, mister." Montgomery wants to see on the cover of Forbes when this $1.5 billion deal closes tomorrow. Now, be a good little girl, hand over your admin tokens, and maybe I'll buy you a nice condo in Florida to retire in. You have 5 minutes to sign the voluntary resignation and intellectual property waiver," Sterling added, his eyes like flint. "Or I'll have security escort you out. I'll ensure your reputation in the tech industry is so toxic you won't be able to get a job fixing toasters. Mechanics are replaceable, Serafina. Remember that." I looked at them, the 2 men who had spent my entire life standing on my shoulders while telling the world they were flying. A searing, white-hot fury settled into my marrow. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my encrypted security badge, and set it on the mahogany table with a soft, final click. "You're right, Sterling," I whispered, using his name instead of father for the first time. "I am just a component, but you should have checked the schematics before you pulled me out." I sat in my SUV in the dark corner of the parking garage, the engine idling. "My name is Serafina. I am 30 years old, and for 12 years, I have been the invisible spine of Vanguard Robotics." While Dominic was losing 6-figure sums at underground poker tables and Sterling was playing golf with senators, I lived on caffeine and server hum. I sacrificed my youth to create the first Class 3 neural link prosthetic, a device that could give a paralyzed veteran the ability to feel the texture of a grain of sand. They thought deactivating my keycard was the end of it. They forgot that I didn't just build the engine. I am the engine. 9 p.m. My phone buzzed in my lap. System alert, Vanguard Core OS, biometric handshake required. This was the fail-safe I had hard-coded into the kernel years ago. To comply with FDA safety regulations for autonomous medical AI, the system required a 24-hour reauthorization from a licensed master architect. It wasn't a password. It was a high-resolution scan of the unique vascular pattern in my thumb. Without it, the system would enter guardian mode, a total mechanical stasis to prevent patient injury. For 4,380 days, I had provided that handshake. I had done it while sick, while mourning my mother Beatrice, and while bleeding for this company. My thumb hovered over the glowing red decline button. "Zero equity?" I muttered, a cold smile touching my lips. "Then zero functionality." I pressed it. The screen flashed. "Authorization denied. Initiating Federal Safety Protocol 21, CFR. All units disabling." I looked up at the Skynet tower. The blue atmospheric lights of the penthouse ballroom suddenly flickered and turned a harsh, rhythmic emergency red. The music died in a screech of feedback. My phone erupted. It was Sterling. I waited until the 5th ring. "Serafina, what the hell did you do?" he screamed. The background was pure chaos. shouting investors and the relentless chirp, chirp, chirp of the emergency sirens. "I'm sorry, Sterling," I said, leaning back as I watched the elite scramble like ants through the glass. "I'm just the mechanic, remember? And since the mechanic doesn't work there anymore, the safety protocols no longer recognize an authorized supervisor. Tell the genius Dominic to sign the logs." "Oh, wait, he doesn't have a license, does he?" "I will destroy you," he roared. "I'll call the police." "Call them," I replied. "I'd love to explain to the feds why you're trying to operate unauthorized medical hardware. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up. I wasn't going home. I was going back. Sterling was a cornered rat, and I knew exactly where he kept his teeth. I sat in the lobby of the Vanguard building, watching the digital clock tick toward 10:30 p.m. I wasn't hiding. I was sitting right there in the open, on a designer velvet chair, scrolling through my phone while the world above me turned into a localized apocalypse. Elite investors in $5,000 tuxedos were pouring out of the elevators, their faces pale with indignation. Mr. Montgomery, the Swiss billionaire whose signature was supposed to seal my family's fortune, walked past me. He looked like a man who had just realized he was about to buy a burning building. He didn't even notice the mechanic sitting in the shadows. The elevator doors hissed open again, and this time, it wasn't a guest. It was Sterling and Dominic, flanked by 4 men in tactical windbreakers. On the back of their jackets, the bold yellow letters screamed, FBI. My heart skipped, but my face remained stone. I had expected lawyers or a settlement offer. I hadn't expected my own father to pull the nuclear option so quickly. "There she is," Dominic shouted, his finger trembling as he pointed at me. "That's her! The woman who hacked the system! Arrest her!" The lead agent, a man with a jaw like a brick named Agent Vance, stepped forward. "Serafina Vance? Hands where I can see them." I slowly raised my hands, my phone still clutched in my palm. Hacked? That's a strong word for someone who just stopped showing up to a job she was fired from. "We have a sworn affidavit from the CEO of Vanguard Robotics," Vance said, his voice a professional monotone. "Alleging corporate espionage, wire fraud, and the deployment of malicious ransomware with the intent to extort $750 million in shares." I looked at Sterling. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was performing. He had his head down, the image of a devastated father. "She rigged it," Sterling told the agents, his voice thick with fake emotion. "She's holding medical patients hostage for greed. It's extortion." The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. The sound was sharp, final. "Extortion?" I laughed, the sound echoing through the marble lobby. "You really are a piece of work, Sterling? You think putting me in cuffs fixes the code?" Dominic stepped closer, smelling of expensive scotch. "I told you, sis. Dad is always 3 steps ahead. Now we have federal authority to seize your private servers and bypass your safety locks. You're going to a cage, and I'm going to the Maldives." "Wait," I said, looking directly at Agent Vance. "Before you take me in, look at the screen behind the desk." Vance paused, looking up at the 20-foot display. It was still flashing. "System lockdown, FD Protocol 21-ECFR-Part-11. "That's the virus!" Dominic hissed. "She's bragging about it." "No, Agent Vance," I said, my voice projecting authority. "Search that code. 21-CFR. Part 11 isn't a virus. It's the Federal Code of Regulations for Electronic Records and Signatures in Medical Devices. The system shut down because the only licensed supervisor, me, was removed without a legal transfer of authority. If you bypass that lock, you aren't fixing a hack. You are committing a federal felony by operating unsupervised medical hardware. Agent Vance stopped and pulled out his tablet. She's lying, Sterling roared, his mask slipping. Arrest her! I'm not lying, Agent, I continued. And check the log history. You'll find that Dominic attempted to bypass safety limits 3 land this evening, using a forged admin key. He wasn't fixing a bug. He was falsifying safety data to trick Mr. Montgomery into a $1.5 billion deal. That's securities fraud, cryptographically signed by the system itself. The silence became heavy. Agent Vance looked from his tablet to Sterling, then to Dominic, who had turned the color of spoiled milk. Sterling, I whispered. You thought handcuffs would force me to give you the keys, but once the feds show up, they look at everything. Vance turned to his team. Hold the transport. Get the SEC on the line. We need a full audit. The game had changed. I was in cuffs, but I was finally free. The air in the Vanguard boardroom was usually thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the smug confidence of men who bought futures. Tonight, it smelled of ozone, stale coffee, and the cold, metallic tang of fear. I sat at the long mahogany table, the handcuffs removed. Agent Vance sat across from me, his eyes glued to a forensic monitor, while SEC investigators swarmed the server room next door. Sterling was pacing like a caged tiger, while Dominic was slumped in a chair, his eyes bloodshot, staring at his reflection in the polished wood. "This is an outrage!" Sterling yelled, slamming his fist against the sideboard. "Vance, you're letting a disgruntled ex-employee run a circus. The $1.5 billion deal is on life support." Agent Vance didn't look up. "Mr. Vance, if your daughter is lying, the data will prove it. Right now, the data is making my job very complicated. Sit down." I leaned back, crossing my legs. For 12 years, I had hidden their incompetence behind layers of elegant code. Tonight, I was letting the mess spill out. "Agent Vance," I said, my voice steady. "Have your team pull the Project Icarus subdirectory. The encryption key is the date Dominic crashed the company car in Vegas, July 14th, 2022. Dominic jumped as if electrocuted. "Don't you dare! That's proprietary trade secret material." "It's a ledger," I countered. While I coded safety protocols, Dominic was pressure testing the system to overclock the sensors. He wanted the prosthetics to look faster for marketing videos. He didn't care that the motor feedback would cause permanent nerve damage to patients. "That's a lie!" Dominic screamed. "Is it?" I turned to him. "Then why did you authorize the safe limit override at 6:45 p.m. tonight, right before the demonstration? You knew the system was flagging a heatsink failure, but you didn't want the arm to look sluggish for Mr. Montgomery. You risked a man's life for a signature." The room went silent. An SEC investigator stepped out of the server room, holding a tablet. He looked at Vance and nodded grimly. "She's right, sir. We found the override, and there's a massive discrepancy in R&D reports. Millions marked for sensor development were routed through a shell company called Double Down Consulting, registered to a PO, box in Macau." Sterling stopped pacing. He looked at Dominic, his face transitioning from rage to a horrifying realization. "Dominic?" Sterling whispered. "What did you do?" "I was going to pay it back," Dominic sobbed, breaking down. "I owed the wrong people, Dad. I just used the R&D funds to cover the gambling interest, once the $1. $5 billion hit! I would have put it back." Sterling looked like he had aged 20 years. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Serafina, honey, we're family. Tell the agents it was a technical error. If the deal closes, we all win. I'll give you the CEO chair. Just help us. I looked at the man who had called me a ghost and a mechanic 4 hours ago, the man who tried to send me to prison to cover his son's crimes. You're right, Sterling, I said, standing up. We are family, and as family, I'm going to do what you never did for me. I'm going to tell the truth. I turned to Agent Vance. I'm not a hacker agent. I'm the architect. And the architect is officially resigning from the wreckage. I've given you the keys. The rest is in your hands. As I walked toward the door, Sterling reached for me, but Vance stepped between us. Mr. Sterling Vance, Vance said, his voice final. You and your son are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and reckless endangerment. I didn't look back. I walked out into the cool Chicago night. The emergency red lights of the tower were still flashing, but they didn't feel like an alarm anymore. They felt like a sunset. 3 months later, the sky over Chicago was a bruised shade of violet, matching the wreckage of the city's tech sector. Vanguard Robotics was no longer a kingdom. It was a carcass being picked clean by vultures. The biting wind off Lake Michigan whipped through the canyons of glass and steel, carrying the faint scent of ozone and defeat. I stood across the street from the Vanguard Tower, leaning against my new car, a sleek, slate-gray electric sedan I'd purchased with the first round of seed funding for my own firm, Aura Systems. I watched as movers hauled out ergonomic chairs, holographic projectors, and crates of prototype components. A massive for-lease sign was already being draped over the golden Vanguard logo in the lobby. The empire Harrison and Tiffany thought they could build on my back had crumbled into dust, and the silence surrounding the building was more deafening than any explosion. The $1.5 billion deal hadn't just evaporated. It had exploded, taking down every major shareholder with it. Mr. Montgomery had been the first to sue, followed by a swarm of class action lawyers representing patients who had been used as guinea pigs for Tiffany's overclocked medical marketing sensors. Sensors she had stolen from my private research and rebranded as her own genius invention. She had played with lives for the sake of an Instagram aesthetic and a bloated IPO. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A news alert flashed across the screen. Tiffany Vance sentenced to 8 years for securities fraud. Harrison Vance out on $10 million bail pending trial. I stared at the headline for a long moment. I didn't celebrate. There was no dancing in the streets, no champagne. Revenge is a cold meal, and it leaves a metallic, bitter aftertaste that lingers in the back of your throat. I checked my watch. It was time for my final meeting with the ghost of my past. I walked into the lobby, the heels of my boots clicking sharply against the marble floor. This was the same security desk where I'd once been treated like an intruder, where Tiffany had ordered guards to escort me out like common trash. The old guard, Mr. Henderson, looked at me with a mix of awe and sheer terror. He didn't ask for my badge or check my ID. He simply buzzed me through with a hand that shook so violently he dropped his pen. I didn't smile at him. I didn't have to. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that his fear was my new currency. I took the elevator to the penthouse. The power was off in most of the building to save on utility costs, leaving the hallways in a haunting artificial twilight. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of a siren. I found Harrison in his office. It was stripped bare. No bourbon on the sideboard, no mahogany desk, no arrogance radiating from his stature. Just a man in a wrinkled, oversized suit sitting on a wooden packing crate, surrounded by the long shadows of his own greed. "You came to gloat, Roxanne?" Harrison asked, his voice raspy, sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He didn't look up. He looked like a statue left in the rain for too long, eroded and meaningless. "I came to collect what's mine, Harrison," I said, my voice echoing off the naked glass walls. The server clusters in Lab 4 were purchased under my personal patent holding company years ago. The liquidators tried to seize them, but the court ruled they belonged to me. "Unlike you, I keep my receipts. I keep everything." Harrison let out a dry, hacking laugh that turned into a cough. "You always were the smart one, hiding your assets, building fail-safes. You let us think we were the masters while you held the leash the whole time. You played us, Roxanne. You played your own father." "I didn't want a leash, Harrison," I replied, stepping into the center of the room until I could see the hollow defeat in his eyes. "I wanted a family. I wanted a father who saw me as a human being, an engineer, a successor, not just a support structure for your favorite child's consistent failures. You chose to make me a ghost in my own home. You chose to value Tiffany's fake likes over my real loyalty. Don't be surprised when the ghost decides to move on and take the house with it. Your mother is calling me every hour, crying," he muttered, rubbing his eyes with trembling fingers. "Beatrice thinks you can talk to the prosecutor. She thinks because you're the hero of the industry now, the one everyone is calling a visionary, that you can make the charges against Tiffany go away. She's your sister, Roxanne. For God's sake, have some mercy." "I'm not a hero," I said firmly, my jaw set so tight it ached. "I'm an engineer. I deal in logic, and the logic is simple. Actions have consequences. You treated the law like a suggestion and people like disposable components. You sat by and laughed while Tiffany drowned Parker's world in that bathtub. You stood there while she tried to destroy my nursing career with blackmail. Now, the system is simply balancing itself. That's not cruelty, Harrison. That's math. And you were always bad at math." "Wait!" He stood up suddenly, his legs wobbling as he struggled to maintain some shred of dignity. "The Mark 7 prototype? It's still locked. The buyers are frantic. If you unlock the encryption, the value triples. I could use that money for my legal defense. I could save the family estate for your mother. I'm your father, Roxanne. You owe me that much for raising you." I paused at the door, looking back at him one last time. The man who had once been a titan of industry looked like a broken child. "The code is gone, Harrison. I archived the keys in a way that only a mechanic could find them. Since you told me for a decade that mechanics are replaceable and that my work was just maintenance, go ahead, find someone else to figure it out. See if their loyalty is as strong as mine was." I turned and walked out, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind me with a final echoing thud. Downstairs, I passed Beatrice by the fountain outside. She started to move toward me, her face twisted in that same manipulative, tearful pout she had used for 30 years to get her way. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to beg for money or a miracle. I didn't stop. I didn't even blink. I unlocked my car with a touch of my thumb, the engine humming to life with a quiet, powerful purr. As I drove away into the Chicago night, the weight of their greed, their lies, and their toxicity finally fell off my shoulders. I looked in the rearview mirror as the Vanguard Tower shrunk into the distance, a tombstone for a family that never was. I had $10 million in the bank, a son who was finally smiling again, and a future that belonged entirely to me. The war was over, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was free. The morning sun broke over the Chicago skyline, reflecting off the glass of a new beginning. I stood on the terrace of my own headquarters, a converted industrial loft in the West Loop that hummed with the quiet, efficient energy of true innovation. There were no golden logos here, no marble fountains, and no ghosts, just the soft click of keyboards and the steady pulse of servers. My name is Serafina, and today I am no longer a phantom in the machine. I am the CEO of Aura Systems. It had been 6 months since the collapse of Vanguard Robotics. While the lawyers were still picking over the bones of my father's empire, I had secured a new patent for a decentralized neural interface, one built on transparency and safety, not ego. My phone buzzed on the mahogany railing. It wasn't an emergency call from Sterling. It was a notification from my bank. The first round of Series A funding had cleared. "Everything is ready, Serafina," a voice said behind me. I turned to see my lead developer, Elena. I had hired her from a dead-end firm where she was being overlooked, just as I had been. But in my company, she had equity and a voice. "Thank you, Elena," I said, smiling. "Let's show them what happens when the architect finally owns the blueprints." Before I went inside, I glanced at the digital news tablet on the table. The headline read, "Vanguard liquidation complete. Sterling Vance sentenced to 15 years." The accompanying photo showed him being led away in handcuffs, looking frail and hollow. He wasn't the monster I had feared for 30 years. He was just a man who had forgotten that you cannot build a skyscraper on a foundation of lies. I felt a brief pang of recognition for the waste of it all. All that resource burned to the ground because they couldn't stand the sight of a woman standing taller than them. My phone buzzed again, a restricted number. My mother, Beatrice, had been calling from various burner phones, begging for a monthly allowance now that the family accounts were frozen. She still spoke as if she could guilt me into being her good little girl. I didn't block the number. I just let it ring until it stopped. The silence was beautiful. I walked into the lab where Mr. Montgomery was waiting. He looked skeptical but curious, standing in front of the Aura Mark I, a sleek, carbon fiber prosthetic that moved with the grace of human muscle. "Miss Vance," Montgomery said, his Swiss accent thick. "Your father's disaster left a bitter taste. Tai sao toi nin tin tung vào hi thong koko?" I looked him in the eye, my voice devoid of the hesitation that had once defined me. "Because, Mr. Montgomery, my father built a kingdom for himself. I built a tool for humanity. My system doesn't shut down because I'm angry. It shuts down if it's unsafe. It's not held together by my thumbprint. It's held together by integrity. I'm not asking you to invest in a name. I'm asking you to invest in the code. And the code never lies." "Elena, run the diagnostic," I commanded. As the system hummed to life, a perfect, steady blue light filled the room. No emergency sirens, no red alerts, just the sound of progress. I stepped out of the lab an hour later with a signed term sheet for $200 million. I pulled my phone out one last time and deleted the daily handshake app I had carried for a decade. The leash was gone. The ghosts were quiet. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just fixing the engine. I was driving. Don't let anyone, family or boss, steal your credit or treat you like an extra. If they don't value you, walk away. When you're the one with the skills and the secret sauce, you hold all the cards, not them. Keep your head down, work hard, and let your comeback speak for itself. Thanks for listening. Hope this story inspired you. Don't forget to like, drop a comment below, and follow for more intense stories. Catch you in the next one.